This painting catfished a king, this king, who chose to marry this woman because of this portrait. But when they met in person, he was disappointed to say the least. So what did the king see in this painting that he didn't see in real life? And most importantly, how did he get such impressive calves? It's a tale as old as time. Picture a man. We'll call him Henry. Henry finally decides to put himself out there after years of being single. He starts browsing potential matches until one really catches his eye. It's love at first sight, and he insists on meeting her. But when he does, she's not what he expected. Henry's in a tough spot, but he knows what he has to do. Marry her immediately. Wait, what? What? This piece is called Anne of Cleves by Hans Holbein the Younger. She's best known as the ugly one out of King Henry VIII's 6 wives. But what if I told you that's exactly what made her the lucky one? Anne stands before a regal blue background. She's dressed in a rich red velvet gown, embroidered with gold fabric and decorated with pearls and gemstones. The square neckline of her dress frames her necklaces, including a large black and gold cross and 2 gold chains, and reveals a sheer high neck lace garment underneath. She faces in our direction, letting Henry see her clearly. Her hands are clasped in front of her, showing off her many expensive gold rings. Her hair is concealed beneath an ornate golden headdress, dripping in pearls and gemstones, with a sheer linen cap that frames her face. Her heavy eyelids hang over her amber eyes, which look slightly down and off to the side. Her straight-on pose, paired with her averted gaze and calm expression, makes her seem present yet passive at the same time, and it looks like she might be smiling ever so slightly. This painting was recently restored by the Louvre in Paris, allowing us to see Anne with the same vibrancy and detail that Henry first saw her nearly 500 years ago. This painting convinced him to marry her, a decision he'd soon regret. This might not be a beautiful love story, but it's a wild ride. Buckle up as we take a trip to England, October 24th, 1537. Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour, has just died from postnatal complications only days after giving birth to a baby boy. By all accounts, Henry was heartbroken. He called Jane his true wife, his most beloved wife. High praise from a guy who would end up with 6 wives total over his nearly 40-year reign. Henry VIII had a habit of obsessing over women, but when they inevitably fell short of his unrealistic expectations, he didn't hesitate to get rid of them. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, held on the longest, but after years without a male heir and with Henry's infatuation with one of her ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, he decided he needed out. Henry and Anne secretly married before the annulment was even finalized, but the same sharp wit and confidence that drew him to Anne in the first place wore on him over time. And in Henry's mind, since she wasn't giving him a son, she might as well be dead. So he killed her. Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, and despite no solid evidence, she was found guilty and beheaded. Not even 2 weeks later, Henry married wife number 3, Jane Seymour. At 46 years old, Henry had lost his third wife, but gained the male heir he'd always dreamed of. Eventually, the king was ready to find his next queen, but by this point, he wasn't much of a catch. He was reportedly eating around 5,000 calories a day, which caused his waistline to balloon. He had leg ulcers, erectile dysfunction. She's lying. Off with her head. I forgot that's a sensitive one. On top of that, he likely had type 2 diabetes, chronic digestive issues, and bad constipation. He did have some pretty incredible calves though. Henry had looked better, but his queen needed to be in tip-top shape. She had to be intelligent, but not too opinionated like wife number 2. She needed to be cultured. Henry played the recorder after all. She needed to be calm and patient to balance the king's erratic temper. And of course, she needed to give him another male heir. Henry only became king after the death of his older brother Arthur, which left him obsessed with securing the Tudor dynasty. But above all, Henry's 4th queen had to be smoking hot. At first, Henry had the idea to gather all of the eligible women in one place and judge them in a giant beauty parade, but the court was scandalized by such an idea. So instead, Henry sent his ambassadors across the courts of Europe to scope out his options. Unfortunately for him, there weren't many. Most women were either too young, already married, or just not excited about the idea of marrying a wife killer.
Yeah.
There was Marie of Guise, who declined. There was Christina of Denmark, a 16-year-old widow who everyone said was tall, beautiful, with an endearing lisp and a really nice pair of hands. Henry was intrigued, but before making a decision, he needed to see her for himself. So he sent his trusted court painter, Hans Holbein the Younger, to capture a realistic portrait of her. This is what he came back with. Henry was sold. She was perfect. Christina, on the other hand, rejected him, saying, "If I had two heads, one should be at the King of England's disposal." Things weren't looking great for Henry, but there was another option. The King's ambassador, John Hutton, casually mentioned to Henry's chief advisor, Thomas Cromwell, that the Duke of Cleves had a daughter, but he also added, quote, "There is no great praise for her personage or beauty." Thomas Cromwell decided to overlook this little detail, a decision he would sorely regret. But as Henry's default matchmaker, Cromwell wasn't just thinking about looks. He was also thinking about strategy. Years earlier, Henry had cut ties with the Catholic Church to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, leaving England isolated in Europe. Cromwell's solution to this problem was to strengthen ties with Protestant leaders in Germany, specifically Anne's brother William, Duke of Cleves. And besides, some reports did say Anne was quite lovely. Despite the mixed reviews on her looks, Cromwell assured the king of Anne's beauty, saying, "Every man praiseth the beauty of the same lady as well for the face as for the whole body." So once again, Henry sent Hans Holbein the Younger out to paint a portrait of Anne and her sister Amalia for good measure. He instructed Holbein to be as accurate as possible and not to flatter the sisters, and what he came back with was absolutely stunning. The vivid colors, the intricate details, he captured each individual eyebrow hair, the slight asymmetry of her face, even the beauty mark beside her mouth. Who could say no to a portrait like this? Not Henry VIII. Anne arrived in England on New Year's Day, 1540, and Henry decided to make their first meeting extra cringe by disguising himself as a peasant. Because in Henry's mind, if their love was truly meant to be, Anne would be instantly drawn to him, even without knowing he was the king. An interesting idea, but in practice, it was a total disaster. Chronicler Charles Wriothesley describes the scene. The king so went up into the chamber where the said Lady Anne was looking out of a window to see the bull baiting which was going on in the courtyard, and suddenly he embraced and kissed her, and showed her a token which the king had sent her for a New Year's gift. And she, being abashed and not knowing who it was, thanked him, and so he spoke with her, but she regarded him little. Apparently, it didn't cross Henry's mind that a young woman might not like a 6-foot-tall, 300-pound stranger barging into her chambers unannounced and attacking her with his lips. Nevertheless, the king's ego was badly bruised, and after their meeting, he reportedly grumbled, "I like her not. I like her not." Henry found Anne dull, awkward, and, in his own words, nothing so fair as she hath been reported. He even called her a Flanders mare, comparing her to a horse. The delicate, demure woman he anticipated was, in the words of historian Tracy Borman, tall, big-boned, and strong-featured. The king immediately blamed his chief advisor, Thomas Cromwell, for exaggerating Anne's beauty. Henry pressed Cromwell to find a way out of the marriage, but calling it off at this point would have risked England's alliance with the Germans. Henry and Anne were married on January 6th, 1540. After their wedding night, Henry reported, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." He claimed that Anne's body was so disordered that he couldn't consummate the marriage, and that she had breasts so slack and other parts of her body in such sort that he questioned if she was really a virgin. What's even more heartbreaking is that despite Henry's cruel and degrading comments, Anne only had nice things to say about her new husband. She told one of her ladies in waiting, "When he comes to bed, he kisseth me, and he taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me good night, sweetheart, and in the morning kisseth me, and biddeth farewell, darling." To which her lady in waiting replied, "Madame, there must be more than this, or it will be long ere we have a Duke of York, which all this realm most desireth." So yeah, they weren't doing it. But I think now's a good time to mention that this wasn't because of Henry, of course, because Henry was really good at all things bedroom related. Just a few months into the marriage, Henry was already plotting his escape plan, this time for one of Anne's ladies in waiting, Catherine Howard. And throughout the final months of his marriage to Anne, the 49-year-old king could frequently be seen visiting the 17-year-old's chambers. Yeah. Anne's marriage to Henry only lasted around 6 months, the shortest of all of his 6 wives. By this point, England no longer needed an alliance with Cleves, and Henry saw the opening he needed to cut ties. Henry claimed their union wasn't legitimate because they never consummated the marriage. He also pointed to Anne's previous informal betrothal to Francis, Duke of Lorraine, even though that arrangement had been called off long before the wedding. Anne found out about the annulment just days before it was finalized. She accepted the news calmly and without protest, but behind closed doors, she was terrified because, well, she knew what happened to Anne Boleyn. Luckily for her, she didn't share the same fate. When she stepped down as queen, the king's ambassador remarked, "It is a matter of great regret to these people who loved and esteemed her as the sweetest, most gracious, and kindest queen that they had ever known or desired for a long time." Henry's marriage to Anne was officially annulled on July 9th, 1540, and before August came around, he was already married to Catherine Howard. But what's really going on here? Was Anne actually as unattractive as Henry claimed? Did Holbein's portrait really misrepresent her? It seems pretty unlikely that Holbein would have intentionally misled the king, though there's a chance he may have embellished a bit. Maybe her extravagant clothing helped draw attention from her face, or perhaps he captured her at a flattering angle. Holbein was known for his incredibly lifelike portraits, but he also had a way of subtly infusing personality into his depictions. Take his portrait of Sir Richard Southwell, for example, with his cold and calculating expression, or Erasmus with his sharp features and focused gaze, emphasizing his intelligence and wit. Holbein definitely painted Anne with a gentle hand, which may have been a reflection of her kind and generous nature. She was well liked by everyone. Holbein probably liked her too. What goes against this, though, is that the king's ambassadors said that Holbein's portrait was a good likeness of Anne, so maybe the annulment had less to do with her appearance than Henry let on. When Henry and Anne met, they didn't even speak the same language. Henry wanted a wife who was educated and cultured, but Anne was brought up in a completely different world than Henry and never received a formal education. What's more, the king thought that the way she dressed was foreign and weird. Anne did her best to adapt. She picked up some English and learned a few court customs, but she wasn't really around long enough to fully adjust. Both Holbein and Anne of Cleves made it out of the volatile Tudor court without losing their heads, which I think speaks to how clever and diplomatic they both were with the king. In Holbein's case, though, it also shows just how indispensable he really was. In an era before photography, being a skilled portraitist was basically a superpower, and Holbein was one of the greatest of his time. His talent didn't just bring him into the circles of the most powerful people of the 16th century, it helped him survive while he was there. But not everyone was so lucky. Thomas Cromwell, the man who arranged Henry's marriage to Anne, took the fall for its failure. He was beheaded the same exact day the king married his next wife, Catherine Howard. It's hard not to feel bad for Anne of Cleves, a young woman sent to a foreign country to marry a man twice her age, only to be rejected and humiliated, so humiliated that she never even returned home to Cleves ever again. Somehow saying all of that out loud makes it sound even worse. But was Anne really the ugly one of Henry's wives? I don't know. It's pretty much impossible to know, I guess, mostly because it's so subjective. But I do know that she was the lucky one. Anne handled her marriage and annulment like a queen. Henry didn't take kindly to people disagreeing with him, and Anne was smart enough to keep her mouth shut. Because of this, she walked away a very wealthy woman, receiving a huge annual allowance and several estates, making her one of the richest women in England. And only a few months after the annulment, she was thriving. The French ambassador reported, "Madame of Cleves has a more joyous countenance than ever. She wears a great variety of dresses and passes all of her time in sports and recreations." Anne remained close with Henry and his daughters for the rest of the king's life. She was referred to as the king's beloved sister, and Henry occasionally sought her advice on important matters. Of course, not everything was rainbows and butterflies. Anne had been cast aside and demeaned, and despite her reserved nature, she wasn't above throwing a few jabs of her own. She was offended by the king's next wife, Catherine Howard, and didn't hesitate to claim that she was the more attractive of the two. After Catherine was beheaded for cheating on Henry with her cousin, there was talk of Anne reclaiming her title as queen, but Henry shut that down immediately. Anne wasn't shy about her opinion on his next wife, Catherine Parr, reportedly saying, "Madame Parr is taking a great burden on herself." And honestly, she wasn't wrong, as Henry only grew more angry and paranoid with age. Anne's financial arrangement with Henry was never truly secure and always subject to change, which is probably why she never remarried. She lived out her life in England and died of cancer at 41, outliving Henry and his 5 other wives. Christina of Denmark is often referred to as the one that got away, but I think Anne should have this title too. She was intelligent, kind, poised, and I think she looks great. Unlike... I seem to have forgotten what I was going to say. Plus, she never had to consummate the marriage, which only adds to her lore. But if she missed anything about being queen, it had to be waking up every morning to those beautiful calves.